Old Swedish and other variants of Old East Norse, an introductory overview. If you've been following this whole little series, you will recall that when I made the review for Old Norse, I did say that it would be more appropriate to call that Old West Norse, and we'll get back to that. And you also will have noticed that there was a sort of happy correspondence in nomenclature with the West Germanic languages. If you heard the term Old High German or Old English or Old Dutch, you knew that you were dealing with something from about the year 700 to about the year 1100 roughly. Whereas if you heard the term Middle English or Middle Dutch, you knew you were dealing with something from about the year 1100 to about the year 1500. Whereas with Old Norse, Old West Norse, I already explained that that didn't overlap quite so well. And the same is very much true with Old Swedish or Old East Norse. These languages are actually later in time than most of the Middle languages that we have already looked at. In general, the West Germanic languages began to differentiate themselves from each other about 500 years earlier than did the Norse languages. And so we had what was variously known as a Common Norse or Proto-Norse until about the year 1000. And then from about the year 1000 to about 1200 or 1250, we got Old West Norse and Old East Norse. Common Old East Norse, what we're looking at today, not differentiating itself until Old Swedish and Old Danish in particular, until about the year 1250. So the texts we're going to be looking at today are from about the year 1350 or 1400. But there's a bit of confusion also because these same terms are sometimes applied to older things, such as this runestone here from Sweden in about the year 900. Because it was found in Sweden, it's sometimes also referred to as Old Swedish, but that's really sort of a common language at that time. What does this say? This says something like this. After Wamuth stauntu runar thar in waren fathi father aft feikjaun sunu. After Wamuth stand the runes there, but Waren, a man's name, Fathi, made them a fathir, a father, after Feikjaun, a dead Sunu. The runestones, there are thousands of them, dating all through the so-called Dark Ages. In general, they're just sort of monuments, gravestones. They're not terribly interesting. But when we get to Old Swedish proper, that's why I gave this video that title. Old Swedish has more materials to read than the other examples of it, at least that I've ever been able to find. And that's one of the principles of polyglottery. You don't learn a language to read it, just to do philological study, but also to read it. And there's quite a fair amount of stuff to read in Old Swedish. This is a legend about Saint Eric. Again, this is from about the year 1400. Här viljen vi med Guds nåden sikje med faum orthum aft them helga Guds martyre Sancto Eriko, som forðum var kunninger I Sverige. Here want we, with God's grace, to say with a few words of that saint, God's martyr, Saint Eric, who earlier was king in Sweden. Bada af eit och edla han var svalfast av kunninges släkt som av andrum Sverikes höfdingjum. Both of his heritage, his lineage, and his nobility, his origin, he was so steadily, so fast of kingly lineage as of any of other of Sweden's leaders, kings, noblemen. Sithen riket var utan forman, och han var kär allem landsens hövingjung och allem allmögenen, þá valde de han till könig med allmogens god vilja, och sattes hedherlika av königsstol vid Uppsala. Back then, the Reich was without form, and he was dear, beloved to all of the land's nobility and all of the common people. So wanted they him to king with all of the common people's goodwill, and they sat him in glory with honor on the king's stool with Uppsala. So that's what Swedish looked like about the year 1400. Again, this is Old East Norse as an example, differentiated from the classical language, Old Norse, proper Old West Norse, that is the ancestor of Old Icelandic and has the most literature to read. Apart from Old Swedish, there's what's known as Old Gutnish, or Gothic, from the island of Gotland, and that was, some people say it's just a dialect of Swedish, some people say it was a self-standing language. That's always a problem in linguistics. This says, Gotland hit de første maver than som stjeler hit. Gotland, the island, found first a man who was Fjalar called, that man who was called Fjalar. Þá var Gotland så eluist at det dagum sank og nautum var uppi. Then was Gotland so bewitched, magic laid over it, at the daytime sank down, and nighttime was up, so it was always nighttime there. En þann maður kvam fyrst í eldi á land, og síðan sank þitt aldri. But then the man, he brought first the fire to the land, and afterwards it sank there, it never sank down again, so you had night and day again. Þessi fjeller hafti ansun sem hit hafti, en hafta kuni hit hvíta stjärna. This fjeller had one son who was called Hafti, and Hafti's wife was called Hvítastjärna, white star. Þain two bygdu fyrsti á Gutlandi. These two lived first on Gotland. Fyrstu nátt sum þain saman swafu, þá drømdi henni drømmar, så þeim þrír ormar waren slugnir saman í barmi hennar, og þutti henni sem þær skriften ur barmi hennar. The first night that they two together slept, then dreamed to her a dream, as if three worms or three snakes were writhing together, bundled together in her womb, in her stomach, and she thought, it seemed to her, as if they were writhing out of her stomach. Þinna drøm segði hann fyrir hafta bondu sínum, hann ræð drøm þína so. This dream said, she said to Hafta, her husband, and he interpreted the dream this so, in this manner. So that's Old Gutnish. And then to me, what I would really love to know a lot more about, and I'm hoping actually through this series maybe somebody will give me some leads, is Old Danish. Obviously, if Old Swedish is defined by being differentiated from Old Danish about the year 1225 to 1250 to 1500, there must be a lot of Old Danish as well. But it's been kind of elusive in my life. I've made something of a quest of trying to find it, and whenever I've gotten books through Interlibrary Loan that have intriguing titles like Old Danish Ballads or Old Danish Legends and the like, they're inevitably just in the quaint antiquarian sense of being old, and not in the philological sense of referring to that particular time frame of the language. So I think that there must be a fair amount of Old Danish legends and texts to read, but I'd like to know a source for them. But anyway, here this one says, this is also from about the year 1400. Það var Haldan König, then was Haldan the king. Han drap Þageir sin bróðir, Ró og Skat og þeirra venner, og síða strado hann. He killed then his brothers, Ró and Skat, and their friends, and afterwards Straw died. He died in bed. Haldan han hafte tva